Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from Consensus in Austin, Texas, and joining me for this segment we have Matt Leising, co-founder of Decential Media. We're here to discuss the Ethereum scaling roadmap, the state of Layer 2s. Now the network can compete with Layer 1 in terms of adoption. Matt, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to TradeTalks.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
This is awesome, and you've been covering the space since 2014, so you're a dinosaur in terms of media coverage. So I'm excited to get your perspective here. Provide us a broad overview of the Ethereum network since the DAO hack of 2016.
Oh gosh. So it was a much smaller world back then. The Ethereum Foundation was, rather new. The founders, Vitalik, everybody was like it was like a close-knit community. Now they've got ETH conferences all over the world. It's just, grown exponentially. I go to events and I don't know anybody, and I used to go to events and I would know a lot of people. So it's just exploded, and I think that's great, and I think it kind of shows the robustness of the technology. So it's, whereas in the DAO hack you had a proposal put forth to the community to say, okay, do we want to do a hard fork and change the history of the blockchain so that it's as though that DAO hack never occurred? And the community was pretty small and tight-knit, and they passed it. Today, I think it's still rather tight-knit, but it's so much bigger and spread out over the world that it's harder to imagine people coming to a consensus like that.
Right.
So I do think they all are still very much in line with the original ideas of being decentralized and working to scale. One of the things that they did just a few years ago was the merge, where they switched from proof of work to proof of stake. They did it seamlessly. It was actually kind of boring in the end, which was amazing.
Sounds like Y2K, right? Remember how we all prepped for
yes,
Y2K?
I was at a Y2K party, and
Yep.
nothing happened in the Y2K part. The party was great, but same sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this is a major technological change that they pulled off rather seamlessly. So I guess I'd say it's a lot bigger, but I think it's still a very cohesive and coherent community.
What about the scaling roadmap, including when you think about Layer 2s and how the network compares with competing Layer 1s in terms of adoption?
Yeah, they're pulling that off as well. I think they are now working towards, I think it's called sharding, where they're going to be separating parts of the blockchain into geographical regions and doing consensus there so that the whole global network doesn't have to become involved. And they've pulled off, again, like a lot of these major technological changes that I think are quite amazing. It's still got a long ways to go. If, as a payments network or as a payments rail, it's going to compete with somebody like Visa. But I think the one thing that my coverage of this community for almost Ethereum is specific for about 8 years, it's what they say they're going to do, they do. It eventually happens. It might not be on the timeline they eventually, initially say, but the community always does come together, and the developers come together to deliver on what they promise.
How are they approaching more scalable adoption, speed, gas fees, all the common challenges that is associated with it?
Yeah, so the gas fees are Layer 2, right? That takes a lot of transactions off of the main layer, where you have to pay for every transaction that goes through the Layer 1. On Layer 2, you can kind of like open a bar tab, do a bunch of transactions, come back at the end, and then pay a fee and settle and get in consensus with the main layer. So they've kind of solved that, and there's Arbitrum, Optimism, lots of very successful L2s. Coinbase has one called Base. So that really is, I think, a way that they're seeing opportunity there, because you want to be the biggest L2, because then you've got that kind of scale and growth, and sort of like you're the incumbent, and so there's a lot of good competition there. Like I said, some of the other things they're doing is to try to separate the global network into pieces so that everybody doesn't have to be involved, and that should help with the speed. And so, they've laid out a roadmap, and it's going to be a few years until we see all the pieces in place, but I'm confident that they're going to get to that.
You wrote a book on this, Out of the Ether, 4 years ago, so you do know the ecosystem intimately. Has your views changed on Ethereum, for better or for worse, in those 4 years?
I've only grown more impressed,
right,
to be honest. I knew that they were a good, I like them as people, to be honest. I was coming from covering Wall Street, where I didn't find a lot of people that I sort of would want to invite over for dinner, to put it nicely. I think there's a lot of altruism and a lot of people who think they can change the world in Ethereum, and reporting on my book, that kind of I really came to believe that. And I think what they've done with, for example, getting off of proof of work, which is incredibly energy intensive, carbon emissions are a huge concern, onto proof of stake, which is pretty much like carbon, it's not neutral, but it's kind of like what Amazon does. So those are the kind of things that they've said they're going to do, and they follow through on those promises. So, and then like I mentioned, the merge I thought was one of the most amazing technological accomplishments that I've seen in my lifetime. They were working with seven different teams all around the world. They had to all coordinate it perfectly, and it was live. Like, they didn't take Ethereum offline to do that. It was like one block, you're at proof of stake, the next block, proof of work, next block you're at proof of stake, and they did it. And so I'm very impressed. I mean, I know there's a lot of issues and a lot of things that they still have to work out, but as an ecosystem, I've only grown to be more impressed by them.
Here's a question. It might be elementary, and it's not specific to Ethereum, but you had mentioned before, the difference between Ethereum and Wall Street as an example.
Yeah.
So with Wall Street, we know that, whatever ABC bank, this is a corporate structure, this is a CEO, and with Ethereum ecosystem or any other network, they will, who is they, right? And then second to that is, how do you ensure that control or contributions to the network remains equal, and that it doesn't become like an us versus them, like they become still equal? If that makes any sense.
It does. That's kind of one of the things that's really interesting about it, is that it has much more of a flat structure rather than a top-down structure. So if you're a startup or a developer, you can enter the Ethereum ecosystem and start writing code and deploy smart contract-based decentralized apps on the network almost immediately.
Right.
And like Uniswap is a huge success story. It's a decentralized exchange. I don't know how many lines of code. It's like in the dozens. That's all it is. And it became one of the most popular and successful apps on Ethereum, because it allows you to just interact with a smart contract, so you can change like your Bitcoin into Ether, or one coin into any other coin. There's nobody involved in the middle. It's not like the New York Stock Exchange. It's code.
Right.
And yet it became a multi-billion-dollar application on Ethereum in a very short amount of time. So it's, in that sense, kind of merit. It's about merit. And if you've got the code, if you've got a good idea and you can deploy it, I think you're going to find success there. So there is no they, really. And the one thing I would say is that there are rules about if you behave in ways that are counter to what is best for the chain, then you can have some of your Ether taken away. Because as a validator, now to approve transactions and create the next block, you have to pledge 32 ETH to be a validator. And that sits in, it's called staking. It sits in a contract. And if you go against the best interests of the network and do something like you try to hack somebody, or you try to reorder transactions, all sorts of things, they can take some of that Ether away from you. And so there's an economic incentive to do what's best for the network and to be in line. And so they do have those sort of mechanisms in place. But it is, it's permissionlessness. That's really what is that's one of the main cores. It's decentralized, permissionless, and it's something that is not supposed to be changeable. So it's immutable. Those are kind of the three pillars of what this sort of, Ethereum is really built on.
It's interesting. I wonder if there will be some sort of evolution of governance, whether it's among the community or however this plays out.
Yeah, there's governance.
Right, like to your points before, validators are going to have to stake.
Governance really comes down to more like the applications that you're using. Like if you have a decentralized autonomous organization or a DAO,
right.
That all has a governance layer. It's got rules. But like I'm saying, this is all open source. It's like the code is there. You can go learn Solidity and be deploying apps on Ethereum as soon as you can write, something that works. And that's kind of that was the whole idea, I think, for a lot of people, was like, there's very few barriers to entry, and it is kind of democratizing the way that organizations work and how money works, and so that's what fascinated with me from the beginning.
It's like you're going to walk into JP Morgan and be like, here's this amazing project, and I'm just going to go, right into the tech stack, and boom, now I have my own project. It just
They're going to laugh you out the door, right?
I'm sure I'll be getting arrested.
Yeah. So that's it. That's the idea, is that it's putting control back in the hands of like kind of everyday people.
All right, I appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
It's a pleasure.
And thanks for joining me from Consensus. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.